Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. Neil Pickup here with you, the fat lad in the mother fluffing house. And all fans of the World Armwrestling League will know the guy who's sat opposite me right now. He's one of the most endearing, one of the most popular, one of the most promising arm wrestlers on the circuit, in or out of the World Armwrestling League. Ladies and gents, Mr. Paul Linn. Paul, how's it hanging, mate?
Great, man. Thanks for having me on. Truly an honor, and I can't live up to that introduction, but I'll do my best. Love the show, and like I said, I mean, like anybody who's tuning into this for the first time because maybe I shared it or something like that, make sure you like and subscribe and pass this on. It's absolutely the best arm wrestling show out there. I've made it through many workouts with this on my earbuds, so can't wait to get started.
And then people might ask me why I have Paul Linn on the show. Why am I a fan of Paul Linn? What can I tell you? Hey, checks in the post, mates.
I'm a shameless promoter.
So, Paul, I know you've seen some of these episodes before. We want to take this back to the origins of Paul Linn, where you came from, your sort of walk through, and not just in arm wrestling, sports in general, strength sports in general, or other, because I know you've got sort of a varied past in terms of your athletic background, and I know people are going to be keen to understand that, mate. So, where was that beginning, mate? What sort of were your early inspirations in sport, in strength sport generally?
Well, like, I come from, I mean, I guess if we're going to start at the beginning and really get a real picture of what drove me in the directions I've gone, I guess we kind of have to start with my general upbringing, which is not something that really comes up in, arm wrestling discussions. So it's something that I kind of, unless I'm asked, I leave out. I came up, in, struggling for the words. I had a really challenging upbringing, from a lot of different standpoints. I came up from very modest upbringings. I was raised by my mother and my grandmother off and on. And there wasn't, I'm not coming from like a highly educated family. And my father actually went to prison when I was 6 years old. And he wasn't largely in my life prior to that, only off and on a little bit. And it was third strike, drug charges, weapons charges. He went away for 26 years. So at that point, at 6 years old, I hadn't really delved into any sports, because it was just my mom and my grandma and wasn't really pushed in a whole lot of different directions like that. When my dad went away, then it was kind of an opportunity for me where my mom was like, listen, I got to get this kid doing something. And, sorry about that.
Yeah, mate. No problem.
Yeah, so my mom kind of started me off, was like, all right, I gotta get his hands full. So she started putting me in camps. So I guess around like 7 or 8, she would put me in these summer camps where I basically would try out a different sport, week by week throughout.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I did that for several years. At the time, she was homeschooling me, through kindergarten and first grade. And I didn't have a whole lot of social interaction. So that was my first opportunity to get my feet wet as far as organized sports. And from that point,
were you a big kid, Paul?
No.
Okay.
No.
How was you sort of physically? Were we average size, small, big? Where were you at?
I would say I was average, but I was thin. As far as I compared to my peers, I was never like elite overall gifted athleticism, but I was a fairly well-rounded athlete. In the elementary school, Maydays and races, I would win the 100, you know what I mean? But not against, then once I got older, the speed plane changed. So really I spent my younger years just feeling out what I wanted to do. But I mean, it's tough when you got a mom and a grandmother, raising you. So, my mom did her best. She took me out and played catch with me. She played basketball with me. She fostered it as much as she could, but I had to kind of really seek it out on my own. It wasn't really until, so my mother, after my father went away, my mother wound up meeting another gentleman who had just gotten out of prison. And that eventually, years down the road, after he did 2 more stints in jail, she finally married him. But this actually was he was the first person really to kind of, he was not an intelligent person, but he was a big sports fan as far as football goes. So he was the first one to start talking about football to me. Our relationship was very strange, and we didn't have a whole lot of positive interactions at all. But the few positive interactions that we did have were my first opportunity to pass a football. But there was really nothing beyond that. But that was my first interest in that sport. But I started playing baseball. I all started baseball, basketball, same thing. Basketball was my first love. I wrestled at a young age, did very well at that, just didn't like it. And I didn't actually pick football up until I was in 7th grade. We moved to another neighborhood, and a couple of the kids that was living in the building we were living in was playing for a local football team. And I said,
7th grade, like around 12, Paul? Is that around?
Yeah, 12, 13, right around there. Yeah. So I got into it late, and I had no idea what I was doing. But I've always been very, very competitive, like innately. I hate to lose. And my mom never let me win anything at a young age, ever. Nothing. Like if I had to win, I had to beat her. It was Monopoly. It didn't matter. And I spent plenty of time storming off, crying, pouting and stuff from losing, just because I hated the feeling of losing. Didn't really care about winning, just hated losing. So, I think that kind of drove my innate aggressiveness, to out hustle. Being that I wasn't the absolute most gifted athlete on the court or on the field at any time, I felt as though I had to make that up with sheer effort. So when I first got involved in football, I had no idea what I was doing, but I was aggressive and I had a motor that didn't stop. So I wound up having success like early on. And God blessed me with, that contact gene, as we like to call it. I was not fearful at all of any type of contact or any type of like, Now, and
I think a lot of us have had that in us who are in this sport,
Right. And it's funny though, but now through coaching and seeing different kids come up and, you can bring aggressiveness out of a kid, but it's a long, arduous task. And a lot of it is like innate, and we call it the contact gene. You either have that gene or you're constantly trying to develop whatever gene you do have to get as close to that as you possibly can. But some of these kids just come out the womb as savages. So I like to think, I was blessed with that over athleticism and size. My speed, my agility, my strength, I had to work on. I was naturally stronger. I was naturally at a young age, physically stronger than most of my peers that weren't vastly larger than me. So like in my same age, I was disproportionately strong for my size, which helped me in wrestling and football. Yeah. And I actually found like resistance training at a fairly young age. The same buddy who got me started in football, his dad just had one of those old sand weight sets down in the basement of the building we lived in. And, that was my first introduction to weight training. And we kind of went down there religiously. So I learned how to do the basic movements early on. And that for whatever reason, I really adhered to the idea of building something like, progressing slowly over time. One block at a time,
So it was more sort of, diligence, progression based rather than you specifically enjoying it. It was just a means to an end.
Right. And so I would say at that point, I was enjoying the learning process of like, okay, this is how you get stronger. Okay. This is how it's going to relate to whatever you want to do in life or sports. I think I enjoyed the learning aspect. As I got older, I enjoyed the release aspect, meaning like, I can shut my brain off. I can move these weights, you know what I mean? And I can forget about my problems. So that definitely became therapeutic. And throughout my life, it's become a positive addiction. So now I've, through a little bit of OCD, I've developed the absolute need to train. If I'm not training, I feel like I'm just wasting away. So, and I also feel like, mentally, I'm not as balanced of a person if I'm missing lifts or if I'm missing some form of competition. Mm-hmm. So I do see it from the beginning. There's also other drives to that too. So like my desire to be strong, a lot of that was driven by my relationship with my stepfather, who was a violent and he's a large career criminal type dude who, who really, he only valued, like physical dominance was his only, that's how he evaluated anyone. So, and then you pair that up with some of the neighborhoods I lived in. We fought quite a bit, and I had a lot of anger, for a lot of reasons. So, if it was going and training boxing down the road, out of the guy's house on the corner, or going and lifting weights, there was that aspect of, okay, I want to get bigger and I want to get stronger. Not just for my sport or not just for myself, but also because I want to be physically dominant.
And were you the guy who was in a group, or were you the lone wolf?
No, I had friends. I had a group of friends, that, and I think early on in life, I made a lot of bad decisions. I still have several friends from that time frame in my life, where I still communicate with and everything. But I did have a group of friends, and a lot of them were not on necessarily the same path that I wound up getting on. Focuses were a little bit different. And the thing that always kept me grounded, was the fact that I did love sports. A lot of my friends didn't play any, you know what I mean? And really didn't play anything beyond like junior high. They had friends involved, in just general, street type activity. And luckily, me being able to use sports as that thing, like, okay, I need to be eligible or I need to be working towards this. It kept me away from doing any type of drugs or getting into too deep into that lifestyle. And through time and mistakes that I made down the road, I actually matured enough to say to myself, I have to change my friend group and I have to refocus my circle. But that's a little bit later on in the story. That's college time frame where I started.
And in terms of sort of geographical location, mate, were you in the same place as you are now? Were you a different part of the country? Where were you based at this time?
I'm homegrown. I'm Harrisburg, PA till I die. Yes. But now let's just say where I live now is vastly different from where I grew up. Vastly different. Right. Yes. I can drive to a couple of my old apartments and houses in 10 minutes or so, but we're on the outskirts now. So it was one of those things where luckily sports gave me a direction and a mentality that differed from a lot of the folks I grew up with.
Did you have any sort of inspirations, Paul? Were there sporting figures, particular sports, or any particular characters or characteristics that you looked up to, aspired to at that time?
Mike Tyson has always been if you talk if you were to say to me hey, who is the one person you would like to hang out with most? And largely, to be honest with you, as I progressed on, I wasn't per se a fan of anyone. I've never been starstruck really. I'm not the type of person, who's going to see Michael Jordan and start asking for an autograph. I'd rather just have a conversation with the guy. But Mike Tyson, to me, his mentality, and just his backstory, to me is so interesting. And then where he's gone through his life. I've always been enamored by his sheer tenacity, and that was something that I looked up to. And, I never really boxed competitively, but I always had that, I didn't have the access to it readily. But I love boxing as a kid. I love the fight sports, and MMA was just coming out when I was in junior high. I remember renting UFC 1, 2, and 3 from Blockbuster, and I was hooked. So honestly, when it comes to like the athletes that I think I look up the most to, it's the fight game, athletes, just because of the discipline required and the one-on-one combat aspect of it, which I always loved, even though I didn't do it competitively myself. And then obviously, you know, you got your role models in the sport that you're playing. So I love Ray Lewis. I really liked his mentality. When he first came to the league, I was like, who is this guy? I mean, he came out his first year, he's going to be the greatest linebacker ever to play the game. I'm like, who is this guy? What is he talking about? And then over time, you just see him make his own reality.
Yeah, absolutely.
And every aspect of this dude. And I feel like Ray Lewis is like the Mike Tyson of football. You know, he was a killer, but he was a student of the game. And I think that's what drew me to Mike and Ray, is how serious they took it. And a lot of people, I don't think, if you're not a big fan of Mike Tyson, you might not know how much film time he spent with Cus D'Amato, all, you know, breaking down old fights, old fighters, styles, preparation. He lived it, you know. Ray's the same way. He outworked everybody. More time in the film room. He wasn't going to be outworked. And I always gravitated towards those people that I felt like outworked their opponents and were good or great because they manufactured it through their own effort. Jerry Rice is another one that comes to mind. He caught, you know, he's the first one I practiced, the last one out. He's catching 100 passes before he leaves. You know, those things are the things that inspire me more than somebody who's just genetically gifted. So I think
with Mike Tyson, you make a good point there with him being almost like a throwback in his whole style and approach. I mean, he basically swagger Jack Dempsey, didn't he? With the old solid black shorts, black boots, nothing else, just come to the, you know, that was it. It was almost like, it sort of added to that intimidation factor. There was no, you know, no sort of Star-Spangled Banner, no Living in America. It was on. It was just like, out we go. Solid black shorts. Let's do it.
He's a killer. You know what I mean? A killer doesn't have to come in, doesn't have to walk out and tell you he's a killer. He's a killer. And you're going to feel that vibe regardless of how they present themselves. And you know, I think, you know, as far even in sports and in football and nowadays, and I even tell kids, I mean, you don't need armbands and leg bands and everything else to prove that you're an athlete. Go out and prove it with your game. Nowadays, it's so much, you know, the sporting world is so geared towards drawing attention to yourself, making yourself an individual. And I feel like you can make yourself an individual, through your actions, rather than, you know, the persona that you develop. And I know in arm wrestling, and that's interesting too, because the way it translates to our sport, there are a lot of people with tons of charisma. You know, and then there's other people who are trying to emulate that charisma and it doesn't work, you know? So if you're forcing it with your attire, if you're forcing it with, you know, whatever you're spouting off, you know, people are going to see through it regardless. So I think you can speak, and Mike Tyson spoke extremely loudly with his hands. It didn't need a whole lot.
Then he just, yes, he did.
I love it, man. I love it. Everybody be upset about those pay-per-views because they lasted at under 2-3 minutes. And I was like, that's what I wanted to see.
You get up at 4 a.m. when you were over here and you'd sit there for like 45 seconds and, there we go.
I can do without a Floyd Mayweather 12-round fight where nobody gets knocked down. I can do without that.
Good stuff, mate. Absolutely. So, I can really see that as well, because one of the similarities that you've got, and is really evident about you, is the degree of due diligence that you put into the pursuit of your arm wrestling career, whether it be at the table, whether it be studying other arm wrestler styles, technical nuances, things of that nature, or whether it be your own work ethic. It's very evident that you've come up with that mindset firmly ingrained into what you do. What was your sort of earliest awareness of that was fixed in the noggin? When did you was it the football thing? And when you got into that, did you start to break down games as well?
Yeah, I mean, listen, like I said, basketball was like my first love. Like, the neighborhoods I grew up in, we played constantly, year round, in the snow, in the winter. It was every day. And I think with basketball, I realized that, hey, if I wanted, I was a shorter kid. I had to handle the ball. So I had to work on my handle. So I was out drilling. I went to a couple of basketball camps and I memorized the drills and I did the drills. I repetitively did the drills and I repetitively shot free throws and things like that. And I watched through basketball that, hey, I made my handle, twice as good over the course of, 6 months just by doing these drills. And I think it really sunk in, like, I improved my shot drastically, So I kind of was like, all right, I mean, if I'm not going to be the tallest or I'm not going to be the fastest or I'm not going to be the biggest, I can control what I can control, which is the amount of time, effort, and that I put into it, as well as kind of honing the idea of as efficiently as possible. Like, how can I get to that end goal as efficiently and as quickly as possible? Mm-hmm. And I think it didn't sink in until way later in my career. And it's become even more evident, now in arm wrestling, how important it is to, put yourself around people who are better than you. Didn't understand it until I had that kind of epiphany as a kid. But you're only as good as the company you keep. And if if you're constantly hanging around people who are down here, you might bring them up a little bit, but you're going to meet in the middle. So if you can kind of find people that you want to chase or have attributes that you aspire to be like and put yourself around them as much as you possibly can, you're inevitably going to kind of, transcend where you're at. And through arm wrestling, I mean, the community has been so like open armed for the most part that, when I reach out to Devin, he hits me right back, I was able to kind of communicate with some top guys early on, ask questions and avoid some mistakes. Now, of course, I made a ton of mistakes and I'm still making them, and I still haven't really figured out necessarily if I'm training right or not. But I feel like it wasn't until really after football, and the waning moments of football that I realized, especially when, like, like I said, not to jump topics and everything, but in college, so my whole process to get to college was shaky because no one in my family had gone. So I wound up, and so I wound up coming out of high school. I had a legendary high school coach. He coached at all levels. He coached the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He won Rose Bowls with Ohio State, and he's a Harrisburg native, or not Harrisburg native, but his first high school coaching job was at Harrisburg High. This is like in the 60s, and he was like undefeated for like 4 years. This is before they had playoffs and everything. And I think like his twilight years, he said, I want to come back to Harrisburg. Well, he wound up coaching my high school team instead because Harrisburg High didn't have a job open, and that's where I coach now. So we had a tremendous run with him, and he did a lot for me in recruiting, and he used to coach at Marshall University, and through his connections there, he had me, a partial scholarship to Marshall, which is where Randy Moss went and everything else. It was a good university. I didn't know what I was doing at all. My mom didn't know what she was doing. My grandma, nobody knew. So we didn't understand financial aid. We didn't understand how much college costs. We didn't understand, okay, what does a 50% ride mean? Okay, well, when we finally crunched the numbers on it, I was going to wind up paying more than if I was to go to a Pennsylvania State Athletic Conference school. So I had been recruited by a bunch of those PSAC schools, and I missed the deadline at this point. I had already been like committed to Marshall, boom, 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 didn't know what I was doing. So I missed the deadline, and I lost my scholarship to Bloom initially. And Bloom was actually my head coach's alma mater. So he calls up, boom, boom, boom. He pulling strings. He gets me a partial. They scrape money together or whatever. And then I apply for grants. And because, our financial situation was much to be desired. I was qualified for all the state and federal grant money, so I wound up going for free. So I go to Bloom. In my mind, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm supposed to be a Division I dude. This Division II stuff is for the birds. These guys are going to be, like, they're not going to be good. They're going to be like the high school team. And you get up there and you realize, oh, wait, no, that's not what it is. So my first year, I think I was a little dejected. I had thoughts of maybe not wanting to finish and blah, blah, blah. And my mind wasn't in the right place. And I went home and hung out with some of my old friends. They would go home on the weekends. And it was over a break period, and I had turned 21. I was old for my grade. Went to a couple bars, was with a couple of my buddies. There was a little altercation, wound up getting pulled over, and I was in the driver's seat, and the folks in the back of the car had several different forms of narcotics, and it was packaged up to be sold. And there was a gun in the car, and those narcotics wound up underneath my seat, and the driver and I got charged with 6 felonies. So that was a life-changing moment for me. And I think, like, a lot of people don't know this type of stuff about me, don't really know my upbringing, because I don't necessarily wear it on my sleeves, and I live a vastly different life now. And I try my best to keep everything positive. But like I said, I'm an open book, and I'm not at all shy about, like, some of the stuff I went through, because you don't get to become who you are without, whatever you dealt with initially. So that was a long proceeding for me, through courts and lawyer bills and everything. And really what it was a turning point in my life where I had to say to myself, all right, you have to put yourself around people who are better than you. Doesn't mean that you have to turn your back on, those people that you knew. But if you like me talking to myself, Paul, you got to get your life in the right direction. Like, it was really eye opening, because it was looking at some serious stuff. Things wound up working out. And, I think at that point I made a shift towards, all right, let me find people who are better than me. And I had a friend group in college, a lot of which who were also from the Harrisburg area, who I played against as rivals in high school. And these are like the 9 gentlemen that I'm still on a group text with today, who, and I don't want to give them too much credit because it'll go to their head, but their influence at that point, molded the direction that my life was going. All right. And it wasn't that these guys are perfect. No. They were meatheads, and, we went out and got in fights every weekend, did all kinds of terrible stuff. However, when it came down to the come down, they were good human beings, and they were all driven. And we lived in a house at one point with 9 of us in there, and we just fed off each other's energy. I'm blessed. My group chat it's crazy. These are regular dudes. These are D2 football players who are now about 40 years old. They all still lift the same way. Mentality is all the same. So half of our group chat is this lifting videos. And like, I mean, you wouldn't believe the numbers that these guys will put up. And they're just average dudes. Like, got a video the other day from my buddy doing 315 on a flat bench for 20 at 245. And he's just a 45-year-old or he's just a 40-year-old dude that trains in his garage. Yeah. Like, and it's all of them. And people won't believe it when I tell them. I'm like, you got no clue. And this is just my friend group. Yeah, it's my friend group. So like, if I'm not keeping up with them, or at least somewhere on par with them, and I'm not nearly the strongest in the group. Now I might be able to beat him in arm wrestling, but, so that really, I think, was a turning point. And I think that was an epiphany for me where we fostered our own mentality of, we're going to outwork everybody. You know what I mean? And we're going to hold each other accountable. And we've done so throughout our careers in life too. So like the pushing aspect of like buy a house, buy an investment property, but what's your next move in life is constantly discussed in this friend group. And every single one of these dudes are vastly successful in life beyond their upbringings, because a lot of them have
evolving bar all the time.
Yep.
A focus, an evolving bar, and it keeps you very blinkers on, doesn't it?
Yeah. And
channel.
if you start to slip or you start to stagnate, you're like, oh, I'm insecure about this now. I mean, these guys are moving forward. I got to move forward too.
Yep.
And I, I've been blessed, because I didn't have any of that really, like, okay, where I can try and take the good from somebody. As a kid, I had never been shown positive male role models in any way, shape, or form until football. And I drew from that.
Yeah.
I tried to mold myself off of that. My only, male role models were in a negative light. And I did learn from that. I think, knock on wood, we'll see how my little guy turns out. But a lot of my parenting is geared off directly what I saw not to do. So a lot of my parenting is just doing the opposite of kind of what I dealt with.
Yep.
So I did get that. And I think, the good Lord blessed me with enough, understanding and wherewithal to be able to identify, what was wrong at an early age, or what mentality was wrong, or, so I think that's really the turning point where I put everything together. Like, this is during the end phases of my football career, going into, the next level and everything. And that work ethic was already there kind of innately, but it got sharpened. And then the ability to actually take positives from other people and see positives in other people really kind of propelled my mentality, as to how to approach all things. So I think really that was the turning point right there around age 21 is where things started to click.
What was the outcome of that, Paul, of that obviously serious incident you were involved with? The definitive outcome of it for you?
Charges wound up being dropped. It went through a whole bunch of proceedings. I spent a good amount of money, of my own money. Because throughout all of this, that was one of the biggest things I think also is I never had a safety net, and that taught me a lot. Like, there was no margin for error. We grew up on welfare, Section 8, WIC, public housing. There was no margin for error. There was no emergency fund in my life. When I went to college, I'm doing that on my own. So I worked from day one. So I had this insecurity about not having enough money. So I constantly saved. So luckily at that point, and I worked my way through college too. I bounced at some local bars and I worked at a fitness center and things like that. So I usually carried 2 jobs, but that really, what it did also was it sapped all my money. And it also made me like that all my emergency fund that I had amassed through, savings in high school and everything was gone, It
was used in an emergency.
Yes, in an emergency. And I still to this day, thank the good Lord for getting me out of that, through that, unscathed. Now that wasn't the last issue that I had. I had some more in college before I really got my mind right. But a lot of people, oh, he's such a nice guy. Well, there's a turning point, where I actively try and be a better person now, where I didn't back then. I got into several other, things during college. After that incident, it was fights. And I got into a pretty serious one where somebody got hurt pretty bad, and got some more charges. And, once again, I mean, I feel like somebody's looking down on me, but, throughout that process, I wound up getting the charges lessened as well. But it wasn't until around that time frame till I was like, okay, I got to get it together. Now, I did not get a hold of my temper necessarily or my, propensity for altercations, until a little bit later. Cause I think I carried that mentality and I played football with that mentality. Like, probably my greatest attribute in football was physicality. And I needed that, and I needed to be that. It wasn't just like, you gotta play that way. At that point, I don't think I had the on-off switch,
Yeah.
I was that middle linebacker in life, and I was, there was that mentality that I kind of didn't get out of for a while. And that would be potentially one of those things that friend group didn't really help me with, because they were a lot like that too.
Yeah.
So if
they were a little wild.
Went to a party, if we went to a party, or we went out and we did, it was going to end bad. It always did. But, it took a little bit of time with that. And I think it wasn't until later in life where I learned to kind of turn things on and off. And that was, I think, a real big lesson for me also, is that you can't be the same in every situation, which I think I was doing for a lot in my life. I was being the same person in every situation. Thankfully I learned that before I got into my career, because I have to wear so many different hats. And, I actively do my best to be as positive as I possibly can, because I don't want to put any negativity in the world right now. I feel like I've spent enough of my time, experiencing negativity and putting that energy out. And I'm really done with that. But as far as like knowing when to turn it on and off, if you ask the kids that I coach to describe me, you are going to get a vastly different description from what you get from fellow arm wrestlers.
Yeah.
So you got to wear different hats.
Human donut that you get from the World Armwrestling League fans.
Yeah. It's a little different. But no, I mean, like, I think, like, and what the way I carry myself in the arm wrestling community is the way I wish I had carried myself all the time. But hadn't had that maturity to get myself to this point.
Because what that's allowed you to do is sort of get that reflection on, path A, path B.
Right.
And you can obviously walk both sides of that line, and there's no sort of better way of learning than that. It's real life. Right. It's actual, particularly for your son, like you say, because he's going to get those bad influences in his life. People are going to come up that route, and you're rowing up to have been there, spotted it, lived it, so you can more effectively see that coming and steer him around it. Particularly, hopefully he have the frustration and the anger in him that you had, because very different situation, but.
Right. And it's that just between you and I worry, and I think every parent probably does. I worry from the polar opposite aspect of, like, now I'm giving this kid everything I didn't have. This kid he's got whatever he wants. You know what I mean? Like,
is he going to grow up spoiled or entitled?
Yeah, I hope I talk to him constantly. He's at a very impressionable age. He's 5. He listens. I think I have his ear. We have a very, very, very tight relationship. He'll probably walk in here at some point. With the coronavirus, I got him 24/7. But, and my wife and I talk about it all the time. My wife's actually a refugee from Lebanon. They came up extremely poor also. Their family's unbelievable. They are my family. Like her father is my father. And we're blessed to have a really tight knit family like that. And, I lean on them a lot for a lot of things. But we talk, and, like, this kid's not going to experience anything that any of us experienced. And there's concern, because both my wife and I identify, our upbringing and our influences, the positive ones and the negative ones, to what got us to where we're at. And my wife is extremely successful also. We feed off of each other, and we've never, like, even from we met in college. I was a 5th year senior starting my grad work, and she was a freshman, and she actually went to my high school. We had never met because we were 4 years apart. And just from, like, day one, our first discussions were like, hey, like, we're thinking ahead, when we were like, what do we want? Our first discussions in life were like, and we decided, like, okay, we're probably going to do this thing long term. We're like, hey, we're not in it. We're going to build a dynasty here. We're going to try and create a situation for our kids that is nothing like the ones that we had. Yeah. And we've been laser focused on that from day one. And she's excelled extremely in her career. You know what I mean? and we're blessed from that aspect. But I worry so much about maybe not having those little stressors that push you in the right direction.
Yeah.
So that to me is
it's funny though, isn't it? Because you mentioned it earlier, mate, and I'm a firm believer in that myself. Part through bit of personal experience and part through other things that I've seen. But like you say, you've either got that venom or you don't. And I think if you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth, but you also got that venom, you can't cut it out. It's there.
Right.
You know.
So
if he's got it, it's there.
Right.
You don't need to worry too much. It manifests itself in different ways, but from a positive perspective, i.e., grit, determination, those kind of things. I'm sure there's a social element in that massively.
Yeah.
But I think that if you've got grit and determination and tenacity and desire to succeed and progress, it's in you. And all you've got to do as a parent is try and cultivate that.
Right.
I hope that's the case.
You know what? It's funny. My wife played basketball, and she loves basketball, and obviously I come from a football background. I said from day one, I'm not pushing this guy in any direction. Let him do whatever he wants to do.
Sure.
If he wants to be in the band, he can be in the band. He just better be the best band tuba player or whatever it is. He better be the best.
That's the thing, isn't it? If he wants to go ballet dancing,
whatever.
Shoes in the car, we're doing it. Whatever, as long as they're happy doing it.
Yeah, but it's funny because he said to me and my wife the other day, he said, "Mommy, I'm not playing football and I'm not playing basketball." And of course her jaw dropped because she's like, "You're doing what I tell you to do." Yeah. And he was like, "All I want to do is fight." I said, "Okay." He's in jiu-jitsu and everything now. We're going to get him started in wrestling. I got him the target mitts and everything. And that's all he wants to do. And I'm like, part of me is like, that would be awesome to be a parent for a kid who wants to fight. Not something that I have a traditional background in, but I also love a lot. I would love to be the parent who doesn't know what's going on because I fear being a football dad who's sitting in the stands and criticizing coaches. I won't let myself do it. So.
Well, it's funny, isn't it? I mean, I did a lot of fight sports growing up, through my teens and so on. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to end up as a fighter. You might get to a stage and you realise that it hurts getting punched in the head 500 times a night. And you do, you know what I mean? It's like, this is cool, I'm going to be Conor McGregor. And then you get to like 16, 17, you're like, maybe I'm not going to be Conor McGregor. And this really can hurt. So, other stuff. And it's funny. It's sliding doors. Something happens, you change direction, a tweak this way, a tweak that way. I came into arm wrestling from fight sports. And I've always had the fight sports element around me. I'm still involved in it now, but it doesn't need to define you. You don't necessarily need to go in that direction. It's just an area of interest. And if he really likes fight sports, then why the hell not? I mean,
right. Like I said, it's kind of like refreshing to me because I would love to be a fan of that, from at a young age. And wrestling's one of those sports where honestly, if I had to say what was I most gifted at, it was probably wrestling.
Yeah.
I didn't like it. I mean, not that I didn't like it, but like, I don't know if it was just the grind, the potential weight cutting and things like that. I didn't adhere to it. It wasn't fun enough. And there was no team aspect too, which I did like, football is a team sport, and basketball is a team sport. I like the individual aspects and everything, but I like the team winning as a team too and camaraderie. But I mean, I love to see him wrestle and fight. That'd be great. I think I could be.
Wrestling, I mean, it's the old embrace the grind, isn't it? All the things you were talking about earlier, would he grow up entitled? But I'll tell you what it is. If you can make it in wrestling, there's not a lot you'll not make it in because that's tough as.
Well, you're as mentally tough as you're ever going to be.
If you're not going to do it, are you?
One of my college roommates that I referred to, man, one of my college roommates, it was like eight football players and a wrestler, and Bloom was Division I wrestling, so they were going up against the big schools, and if you went to Bloom to wrestle, you were legit, and he was a wrestler, and I say this today. This is the most dangerous human being I've ever known. And that's not because I think he could beat me in a fight, but because he did not fear, like he enjoyed it. Like this is a guy who would get 2 or 3 fights one night. You know what I mean? He'd fight multiple people. He'd get double leg takedown. He'd get his head kicked off, and he'd come back. Yo, bud, that was a great time. I want to do that again next weekend.
I know exactly what you mean. When I was at university, we had a kid, and he was a high level wrestler. He was like Commonwealth Games level wrestler. I went to Loughborough University and National Sports Team University, and we used to all, like a drink, and with the lads we'd go out, and we were all rough and ready lads. So now and again we'd get into a bit of pissing around on the way back from the pub or something. You'd be like, right, we're going to jump him. So we'd bet like four of us would be walking along. One was like into his kickboxing, the one into his Muay Thai, I'd box, and anyway, we're going to jump him. So we get back and we'd just all pile in from different. He would honestly ragdoll the shit out of us, throw us over fences, throw us into hedges. He once threw me over a hedge into a frigging plant incubator. Like you have these little grass, like 2 foot high, and I've jumped, so I got him in a headlock, and I'm cracking him in the beak, and he just flipped me over and whizzed me over this hedge, and I landed in a plant incubator. I thought, what the fuck? Mate, he was an animal. Every ounce of him solid. He could spin like a crocodile. Oh, he's a bad man. But same thing. He'd come back, nose busted up, lip busted up, and we were all drunk as hell and just pissing around, and he'd love it. Next day, it was like, it was the highlight of his evening.
There is no one more dangerous in this world than a physically strong person who likes to get hit in the head. Or in the face. If they like it, hey, listen, this ain't the guy you want to, it's not the guy you want a one-on-one fight with. Now, it ain't worth a darn, he's not worth a darn in a brawl because he's going to double leg somebody and he's not going to be of any help.
But if you're looking around, not good, man. Not good at all. Ladies and gents, we're 45 minutes into this first element with Paul Linn. And that brings us to the end of this one, but do not go anywhere. We're going to be back with more from Paul. We've not even got into arm wrestling yet, and I've been loving it. 45 minutes in, we haven't talked about arm wrestling. Warming up, it's good stuff. Ladies and gents, hope you and your families are safe. Crazy times out there, but if you're new to the channel, make sure you like, subscribe, tell your friends about it, and we will see you again next time. Till that time, take it easy, peeps.